So I think every utility would say, we get it, we see the future, we're enlightened, we're going to figure out a whole new set of products and services so that we can be an effective partner, the same way I described Comcast is finding through Xfinity X1, things like that, that it can create a value proposition. And if you don't want to work with us, you can go work with the microgrid or put the stuff on your house. But they really haven't figured that out. They're really worried about it. They're probably going to create some non-regulated subsidiaries to compete with those companies on the list as part of their solution. But ultimately, you know, when we had all these nuclear plants, they ended up having huge write-offs because there was no value that was close to the cost of those plants. And they're probably looking at that kind of thing again with a lot of the fixed costs on the system.
So I guess I would argue you don't want to have a high fixed charge. So once upon a time, I'm old, they had what was called lifeline rates, such that if you were poor and used very little electricity, rates were actually very low. I guess what I would argue for, and I must confess, electric utility economics is not my strong point, but what I would argue for is some kind of charge, whether you're moving power into your house or moving power out of your house, you should be charged based upon that, not just, you know, a fixed charge. And that would be fairer, such that if you put rooftop solar on your house and you were selling power into the system, you're using the grid, and you should pay for that.
Yeah, I'll answer that. So the net metering model that we have makes no sense. I mean, the math of it doesn't work. You know, it really doesn't work. So they're actually making it too good a deal for the people who put solar on their house right now. It's one of the major subsidy streams coming in. At the same time, they're charging me way too much for my electric card charge up. They charge me, they add on every kilowatt hour I put in my electric car, a cost for their distribution system, a cost for their people, a cost for reading the meter. And they haven't had any additional cost when I plugged in my electric car, provided they give me some signal not to put it in at the head of the duct, right? As long as I don't use it then, I should pay nothing additional for the distribution, and I pay the whole freight. But when I put solar on my house, I take away from the utility all that money for the meters and the people and the wires, and their costs haven't gone down at all. So we have a major pricing problem.
All right, Harvey, I just want to make an announcement. Last night, the first deal was cut between the solar industry and the utility industry in New York that we helped facilitate around this very question of what should it look like. It was filed with the commission like around 9 o'clock last night. So you can go.
Wow. Heard it first.
So what does it look like?
This is New York, and the New York rep, and there was a quiet negotiation between all the utilities and the solar companies that was facilitated by AEE and ECEC. And Mark Farber, I hired Mark Farber, who was in the solar industry, chair of my board, worked with Harvey. And I actually haven't read it yet. I know that the word back and forth almost blew up on Saturday, right? And it was rescued yesterday morning. So, roughly 100 words. Again, I don't want to, because over the weekend things changed. What I heard on Friday may not be what's in this document that I have to read while I'm on the plane going to Washington this evening, but it's worth checking out and distributing it to folks who signed up. It's not that long, but Con Ed is the one who officially filed it with the New York State public regulators. But I think it's LMP plus D, which is locational marginal price plus distribution cost rather than net retail. I think that's what they talked about, but again, because the politics were roiling at the last minute, I don't want to.
So talk a little bit about on the distribution networks and the problem with mothballing, given all this photovoltaic energy and the sort of infrequent supply and demand, and how to stabilize and how to incentivize cooperation, I guess, between governments, national electricity sort of distribution providers, and what should governments and what should individuals and what should industries do to create an efficiency?
Yeah, so one of the things you get out of this Internet of Things, and you have perfect information really on what everything is producing, consuming, and when, is that you can start creating something you sell. You can make markets for almost anything if you try. And so there's lots of dimensions of grid stabilization that you're getting to. The things that deal with the hot summer week, annual peak. There are things that deal with the fact that the grid modulates in the supply and demand on short intervals. There's sometimes the cloud's going to go over for a few minutes, it's going to go away. All of these things create some kind of requirement that the grid has. And some of the sophisticated grid operators, like the PJM grid operator in the Mid-Atlantic states, is starting to create a market for every single one of those. At this point, people like the beer can manufacturer play the game. But once we get all of that data going to the app of your choice, the app can play the game from the standpoint of you, or some accumulation of you and your Facebook friends can play that game and get value in that marketplace. Anything? You take it.
Harvey, in the U.S., are we seeing mothballing? I'm aware in Europe of plants that have been mothballed as we've seen so much investment in.
The big one is France. France is the one that's really struggling because of they have a national grid that they have, but it's a little bit different in the US.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how many more nuclear plants we're going to mothball because we've written them down to such a low cost to buy a plant that they may shut down or they may not. The operating costs of nuclear plants are actually above the market price of electricity right now, even if you paid nothing for the plant. So we'll see if they mothball or not. Coal plants, yeah, I can't believe that if we don't stay on the trajectory that we're on here, we're not going to see many, if not most, coal plants getting mothballed. Jim Rogers from Duke Energy, 10-state southern utility, came up to a conference at MIT, and he said, you get regulation right for me to be an energy efficiency company, then I will close all of my coal plants. And I don't know if he says that down south, but up here, that's what he said at an MIT meeting.
That's happening. Yeah, Harvey, you were talking about energy efficiency. You discussed about Internet of Things, connecting devices to improve Internet, and then you talked about installing solar panels. Apart from these two, are there any other ways to?
Well, again, an intelligent building is an efficient building, but it's more than that. So yeah, you can't, if you put solar on your roof, but you haven't done anything to reduce the infiltration losses in the house and gotten the building shell tight, and you have a 40-year-old heating system, then it's actually kind of dumb, right? You got to get the system to work together. And then you have to consider the fact that there's this grid stabilization market. We're involved with the utility in thinking about what a zero net energy building program should be. One of the things that's always been odd is we really encourage buildings to have enough solar on them and be efficient enough that net, on average, over the course of a year, they use zero energy, produce zero carbon. But net isn't the world. The world is hour by hour. And there's nothing in a typical zero net energy building program to encourage you to have grid stabilization, modulation, batteries, intelligently charged electric vehicles. And we're building these buildings for 75 or 100 years. So we have to start changing what energy efficiency is to include all of those things.
I'm interested in what your vision is, really, for the future of energy and the grid, or the non-grid, or the microgrid, or whatever. Because as we add more renewables to the grid, and we have distributed generation, that in itself is a really disruptive to the current state of things. And I'm interested to sort of get your view of how you see the evolution of energy in the United States.
Well, I have no idea how it's going to work out. I know what we're going to try, Boston has a major program where they've assessed all the opportunities for microgrids around the entire city of Boston. And the idea is, I think, that a microgrid isn't going to come up with an alternative set of wires to Eversource. I think it's the same wires that Eversource put up and figure out a way to share them. What they're going to do is draw a dotted line around an area and say that the customers within this area are going to take care of themselves for the most part. And just by essentially a backup service, like a major medical policy would be, for those rare occasions when within that network it can't be sufficient on its own. So you'll have the choice of buying your energy through Eversource, or taking the net balance that you have in your, if Boston University has a net balance, and buying it not from Eversource, but buying it from a Boston community microgrid. And that'll be a business decision that Boston University would make.
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, what I would like to see happen is something that First Fuel is pushing for, where First Fuel has this incredible amount of information about what's going on with the grid, what the opportunities are, and First Fuel, or a company like First Fuel, whose interests are aligned with saving energy as opposed to running a law office. They're the ones who are going to push and invest in these conservation opportunities because they'll be able to capture the benefits from them and somehow kind of alleviate the split incentive problem, the capital constraint problem, all these things, because they'll have the information to act and to capture the benefits of those actions.
Yeah, I'll go back to the question you had about whether the customer is smart, and you said the customer is not necessarily particularly smart. And so maybe you're right that the customer sometimes isn't informed, number one, and that doesn't make them dumb, but they're not informed. They don't have the information. And number two, they may be very smart. If you're running a company in this wild and crazy world, when you guys all start your own companies, and you come in that day and say, well, how am I going to get through this week? Probably dealing with your energy bill, which is totally under control, and probably coming in under budget, is not where you should be spending your time. So the challenge is for those of us who, whether you're an advocate for climate or you're running a company that, like First Fuel, your challenge is to make it so painless for them that they don't have to take any time or effort out of their day, which is the smart answer for them, right? As well as the necessary answer for us to solve the climate problem and for you to run a business in a time that's very different than it was in the 1970s, where companies were going broke because of their energy bills. That's not happening. It's not on the horizon. If the company goes broke, it's not because of their energy bill.
Yeah, I guess the right word would have been motivated, not smart, but
right.
There's just not a lot of motivation to kind of shave.
You got to work with that,
yeah.
right? But green, I mean, if we have a map of who's green and you're not on it, your employees are going to be upset, you know, your customers are going to be upset. And, you know, the students at Boston University are going to force Boston University to divest in your company. So there'll be reasons why you'll need to do it. As long as you make it easy, there are some motivations to do it.
Yeah, so one of the things we actually thought about with Michael Gavelber, who's in the audience, and Nalin, was to design a green energy sticker. So most of you are living off campus, right? You have any idea what you're getting into when you rent that apartment in terms of what your winter heating bills are going to look like? You have no idea, and they can be significant. And so the idea would be, if you could provide that kind of information, then your actions when you rent will kind of even out and provide landlords with an incentive to perhaps upgrade their heating systems if they're getting clobbered on their rent.
Well, the idea of the Boston benchmarking and disclosure ordinance was essentially to create that score on every building and work down to apartments at some point, right? And to have something that you don't need a sticker, you'd have it on an app on your phone. You could just know when you went there. And actually the real estate industry is into this. They're building the MLS service with 6 new columns for taking in energy-related data in terms of, I don't know about renting, but in terms of purchasing, because they know people want to know it.